by the end of the session, hopefully, you'll have a view on whether or not PR is good for us. Also, a view on the image of PR and why it has got this slightly dodgy image. I want to look also at definitions of PR. I mean, what is PR? Everybody kind of talks about it, but actually when you ask people who work in PR what it is, they struggle to give you a kind of coherent definition. I'll look a bit at why I think the relationship of PR with the media is fraught, and it is often fraught. Look at general criticisms of PR, and then I say conclude as to whether or not PR is actually good for us. Okay, so that's what I'm going to go through. Hopefully take about 40 minutes or something, so we'll have an opportunity for kind of questions and things like that at the end. Nobody ever wished that a lecture or a presentation was long today, so I'll try and make it reasonably brief. So firstly, I want to start off with the different images of PR, and I think there are 4 contradictory images of PR that I want to look at. One, and I'll talk about it a bit more in a moment, is the sort of Machiavellian male image, which is largely portrayed in popular culture. The other is the sort of fluffy female image that also comes from popular culture. There's then the image that the industry would like to promote, though virtually nobody notices. And then there's the image that actually the media gives to PR. So I'll look at all 4 of those, and then I think hopefully we'll start to see why PR has got this slightly strange overall image. So firstly, taking the Machiavellian male image. If you take popular culture, any of you seen The Thick of It? Brilliant, utterly brilliant series. I commend it to everybody. In the Loop was the film based on The Thick of It, sort of transatlantic version. Largely, it is alleged, I'm realising now I'm being recorded, it is alleged based on Alistair Campbell, allegedly. Somebody said it's the closest you could get without being sued by Alistair Campbell. Anyway, there's a very powerful political spin doctor. More recently, you may have seen The Ides of March, the George Clooney film, where he's a politician and his communications director is rather compromised, as indeed is the politician. So he kind of goes in full of ideals and ends up rather compromised, morally. But he's a powerful figure, as is the character in The Thick of It. Phone Booth, anybody seen Phone Booth? There's an agent in that. What else? Thank You for Smoking. Terrific book, actually, and also very, very good film. These are things all worth watching. All these portrayals of these individuals, they are kind of sort of sexy with a small s. In as much that they have power, they're close to the seat of power, they have influence. They're rather Machiavellian, yeah? And of course, that's mirrored in part by some of the few well-known characters within public relations, like Alistair Campbell, Lord Timbell, the man I sold my business to, used to run Chime, and people like that, and to a lesser degree, kind of Max Clifford. So you've got this Machiavellian male, not necessarily completely trustworthy, but powerful and interesting. Good kind of stuff for stories. On the other side, you've got what I call the fluffy female portrayal, which comes out almost exclusively in popular culture. And certainly, I suspect that some of you, when you decided to study PR, were actually influenced a bit by some of the popular media portrayals, which, whilst not very kind of serious and intense, actually look quite good fun. Sex and the City, Ab Fab. Let me give you some of the quotes from these things. Sex and the City, Samantha Jones. Hey, I'm as good looking as a model and I own my own business. In Ab Fab, Edina says, I PR things, places, concepts, Lulu. I PR them. I make them fabulous. I make the crap into credible. Bridget Jones' diary. Hugh Grant says to Bridget Jones, you come in your see-through tops and short skirts, fanning around with press releases. But actually, She gets to go on television, you know, she gets all these interesting parties, you know. Look, actually she has quite an interesting life. Sliding doors, anybody seen Sliding Doors with Gwyneth, the sainted Gwyneth Paltrow? You know, she comes in, she's late for work, and she comes in, meeting in the boardroom, all males, the directors, which actually is a bit unrealistic in PR terms. You know, she comes in, she's fired, and she says, bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. That's what we do, isn't it? Bullshit, we're in PR. And off she goes. 2 weeks later, or whatever period it is in the movies, she's got her own PR business though, despite the fact it's all been bullshit, bullshit. Really nice offices, nice clothes, running parties. You know, it's a sort of trivial, but actually quite a fun, engaging image of PR. If your choice is between being an insurance broker, a librarian, or training to be an accountant, or following those images, and then it seems quite sort of sexy with a small s. Then there's the media portrayals of PR. You know, actually what journalists write, and it's almost overwhelmingly negative, and that's based on research. That's not me as a PR person moaning. Here's some quotes from some proper research into journalists' attitudes towards PR. Scumbags, insensitive, manipulative charlatans, sleazy, disingenuous. Okay, that's summed up my career. That's what journalists have said about PR. And in the UK, only 9% of mentions of PR are positive. In the States, it's exactly the same. It's about 83% of comments are negative and 7% positive, presumably the rest being neutral. Journalists have the last word, and broadly, and we'll come back onto this, journalists aren't bonkers about PR people. Okay, so that's 3 of the images. The 4th is PR, I describe it as PR as a strategic discipline. This is what the trade associations like to, one particular, the CIPR, like to sort of describe PR very, very serious, earnest terms as a very important branch of management, strategic communication tools and things like that. By the way, my view is if you come across anybody who says strategy more than twice in one sentence, run away, because they're just trying to make themselves sound terribly important. I heard somebody recently said to me they had a strategic strategy. A strategy is a plan, so they had a plan. Extraordinary. So you've got this sort of serious image that the industry tries to promote, but actually nobody pays much attention to that. Frankly, the vast majority of people in PR couldn't tell you what the CIPR definition of PR is. So the dominating image of PR is this sort of Machiavellian or fluffy but fun female thing, or what actual journalists are saying about PR, which is, you know, they're spin doctors, they never tell you the truth, you know, those sorts of images. So kind of not dull, but certainly not straightforward. Not something that necessarily your mum or dad are immediately going to say, marvellous. Little Johnny is going to go into PR. It's not like becoming a doctor or a lawyer. Because the reality is that the reality of PR lies in the middle of those 4 corners. The vast majority of PR isn't done for politicians, which is actually a very small percentage of PR, nor in fact is it actually done for fashion, which is also a very, very small percentage of PR. The vast majority of PR is done for government, universities, charities, NGOs, insurance companies, banks, oil companies, broadband companies, the big stuff out there, often very boring but important, and where a lot of money is spent. And that's actually, say, where most PR, in fact, operates, and not on the extremes of fashion or on the extremes of politics, which probably account for 1 or 2% maximum of people working in PR. But understandably, PR is it's an image business. It's in part judged on the image that people see out there. And again, the reality is that PR, it's got this sort of fluffy or this Machiavellian image, but actually it sits in the middle of most organisations. close to the CEO, not that powerful actually, but close to the CEO. If you're the director of corporate comms in an organisation, doesn't matter if it's a public sector organisation or a corporate, there's probably only one person who knows as much about what's going on as the CEO, and that is the head of corporate comms. Will know even more than the finance director. Because if there's a staff issue, that's a communications issue. If you're trying to influence government, or regulators, that's a public affairs, PR issue. If you're a publicly owned company, that's a city PR or financial PR issue. And then of course, more classically and easier for us all to comprehend is all the PR that's done to consumers, be they business to business or consumers or the general public. So PR is right there at the heart of an organisation. And of course PR is also being done for economic organisations, social organisations, political organisations, NGOs. Wherever something important's happening, there is PR going on. So it's not dull, full of opportunities, which is no doubt why actually it's such an popular university course, grown enormously, and indeed why PR has grown enormously, not just actually in Britain. I'll talk about how it's grown elsewhere later, but I mean completely outperformed the growth in the economy. And it does slightly beg the question, if PR is quite so vacuous, how come it's grown so fast? Has these clever PR people really pulled the wool over the eyes of hard-nosed business people, heads of NGOs, political parties and so forth? So PR has continued to grow, notwithstanding the attempts of the industry to try and make it actually sound rather boring by the way that it describes it. And I want to just touch for a moment on definitions. That's my book, one of my books, just plug that. My mum thinks it's fantastic. This is the CIPR, that's the Chartered Institute of Public Relations definition of PR. Just give you a moment to read that. Okay. Now, I'm about to critique this, you won't be surprised to hear. Having said that, this is so much better than the Public Relations Society of America's definition of PR. Is so appalling, it's embarrassing, but if you want to amuse yourself, particularly you journalists, go and look at the PRSA site. It does say strategy a lot. Okay, so public relations is about reputation, the result of what you do, what you say, and what others say about you. I say I like that as a definition of reputation. It's got a nice clear simplicity. What you do, what you say, and what others say about you. Good definition of reputation. Public relations is a discipline which looks after reputation. Come back to that. With the aim of earning understanding and support and influencing opinion and behaviour. Okay. It is the planned and sustained effort to establish and maintain goodwill and mutual understanding between an organisation and its publics. Well, I've got a few problems with this, and I think actually definitions like this don't do PR any favours. PR does not look after all aspects of reputation. PR certainly tries to look after what you say and what others say about you. It does not look after the substance of an organisation, what an organisation does. And it's a gross overclaim to say that PR does. In a long career in PR, the only time I've ever been able to persuade a board of directors to stop doing something or to do something differently is when they're in crisis. By and large, they don't call up the PR people to say, and how shall I run this business? What should we be making or doing? Nobody does that. So it's a complete overclaim. I mean, and the kind of classic thing is what we've just witnessed at the BBC is commonly described as a PR disaster. Yeah, it's been awful PR. So therefore, was that the fault of the PR department? promise you it wasn't. You know, the poor old PR department, the first thing they heard about Jimmy Savile was what we all heard about Jimmy Savile. They then had to pick up the pieces. What's quite interesting is that some people within the BBC appear to be saying it's a PR disaster, therefore it must be the PR people's fault. I won't name any names. Some people managing to get away without blame because it was a PR problem. And because things like this actually enable people to say, well, it was PR, looks after reputation, therefore it was PR's fault. I mean, ditto the banks. When nobody really believes that PR people in the banks had any idea what was going on or even understood what was going on. I mean, the people doing that stuff in the banks didn't understand it, let alone the PR people. PR people don't control what an organisation does, and that's the most important part of its reputation. So it's an overclaim, but also, is this true? Maintain goodwill and mutual understanding. Do you think that the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are attempting in their PR activity to maintain goodwill and mutual understanding with each other? Because I don't. And you can see them all, you can see the Conservative Party right now going, oh, look, Lib Dem's in terrible trouble. Do you think that Greenpeace and BP are really trying to get mutual understanding? Yeah? Two-way conversation? Or the pro-abortion and the anti-abortion lobby, are they going for goodwill and mutual understanding? Some of the most visible aspects of PR are actually quite bloody, quite aggressive. And that's because what a lot of the public see. Now, a lot of the less visible, less controversial aspects of PR, for broadband companies or insurance firms or public sector bodies, are pretty uncontroversial. And this may be a reasonable description, but to say all PR is about maintaining goodwill and mutual understanding is just nonsense. And I have to say, I think does the industry no favours. And my third criticism of this, and it's an important one, I think, is where's the description of what PR actually does? Yeah? I mean, what do you do if you're a PR person? When I'm doing training, introductory training, an introduction to PR course, I ask people, so let's give me a definition of PR, and people struggle a bit, and I say, so how would you describe to your mum or your dad what it is that you do during the day? And they do realise that saying that they are trying to generate goodwill and mutual understanding, it's describing what they're doing during the day, isn't actually very helpful. In fact, saying things like that rather compound the view that PR is bullshitty, it is spin. So what is it that PR actually does that's different from other forms of communication? And I think the problem with these kinds of things is that it makes people very suspicious of PR. There's Professor James Grunig, who some of you studying PR have probably come across. He's the American doyen of PR studies. So there's actually no substantial research behind any of his sort of theories, but he's the doyen of PR studies. He says public relations should be ethical in that it helps build caring, even loving relationships with other individuals and groups that they affect in a society. So those of you in PR, you're in a caring, loving industry. I mean, it's not surprising when people read things like that and then compare and contrast that with actually what they see PR is like. I think, what on earth is going on? And the trouble is that some of the big proponents of PR describe PR as they'd like it to be, or like it to be seen, not as it is. And actually they fall into the trap of doing exactly what PR is accused of doing, which is trying to make something look far better or different from what it is. Nick Clark, who is sadly now dead, but was a BBC journalist, presenter on The World at One, he chaired a debate on PR and journalism a few years ago, and it's a great quote. I did balk at the catalogue of good deeds ascribed to PR professionals by one of the panellists. By her standards, Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa would have struggled to qualify for admittance to the Institute of Public Relations. And he's quite right. I mean, people, when people go around talking about PR being about loving relationships, really. So say, I think these definitions are misleading and actually counterproductive. So, if I'm so smart, what's my definition? And there it is. Okay. You can. It's in my book, by the way. If you want to buy my book, for which I get about 60 pence a copy, just in case you think I don't want to give that man money. So basically, it's about persuading people to behave in ways that support your objectives. Anybody who works in PR, it doesn't matter if you're working for some wonderful, worthy charity or church, or for some big kind of bastion of capitalism, you are paid to achieve a result, yeah? To change people's behaviour, ultimately. We put to behave in ways that support your objectives. We originally, we thought of having in, to influence, to create awareness. But the question I was asked is, people say, I want to raise awareness. I say, why? What's the purpose of the awareness? PR is a purposeful activity. There's no point in just raising awareness or just influencing people. There has to be an end product. Yeah, it might be quite distant, and it may be sort of once, twice removed from your commercial objectives, whatever it may be. But PR is a purposeful activity. Okay, so you're trying to get people to support what you do. Now that doesn't, or at least not get in the way of what you do. And by the way, of course, behaviour can be passive, as in, carry on voting for me, carry on donating to this charity, carry on buying this brand. Okay, so it's purposeful activity, and how does it work? By the way, this is about the only definition I found of PR that says what it is that PR does. And to say that it works primarily through the use of media relations, hence this thing about journalism, and other forms of third-party endorsement. And that's how PR is different from other comms. It works through third parties. And a really simple way of differentiating advertising from PR, which, forgive me if you've heard this before, is advertising is somebody walks into a room and says, hi, I'm great. PR, somebody walks into the room and people go, hey, he's really good. It's much more powerful, but hard to achieve. And that's, of course, what you're trying to do with PR. Reality is an awful lot of PR effort actually isn't getting people to say, hey, he's really good, but to stop people or discourage people from saying, God, he's really terrible. But it's the same kind of purpose. What you'll also notice about this, our definition, say, this is myself and my co-author, we've put no moral dimension in here. We haven't put in mutual understanding and goodwill and things like that. PR isn't immoral or moral, it's amoral. It's what you try and do with it. It's where the morality comes in. Yeah? And what happens is that if we like a message or we like the organisation that's doing the PR, we call it a campaign. NGOs don't do PR. They do. But they never say they do. They do campaigns, because campaigns are good. Any political party that you support, you'll refer to their campaigns. The other side, of course, are doing propaganda, aren't they? Or spin. So if you like something, it's a campaign. We're not sure about it, it's PR. And if we really dislike it, it's propaganda or spin. It's where you're coming from it. And actually, a classic example of that is the pro and anti-abortion lobby. And this is a particularly powerful metaphor in the States. I mean, there are two groups who are involved in PR because they're trying to persuade people to behave in ways that support their objectives. And both sides accuse each other of lying, of propaganda. Now, my guess is that neither side is particularly peopled or staffed by liars, more liars than you find generally in society, but they believe passionately in their cause and therefore accuse the other side of lying, selective use of facts and things like that. So ironically, quite a lot of PR's bad reputation is actually caused by PR people calling names to each other. So Conservatives accusing Labour and Labour accusing of the Conservatives of misusing the facts, of spinning, all those kinds of things. So that's my definition. By the way, I think the media relations thing is very important. You'll get people in PR saying, oh, PR is so much more than media relations. Yes, it is, but it is the thing that differentiates PR from advertising, sales promotion, and other forms of comms. And basically, when there's a problem with the media, or indeed when you want something good in the media, you go to your PR firm. That's the main thing. Now, that might be online media relations, but that's the thing that differentiates PR from, say, from advertising or other forms of comms. So that's some definitions of PR. So why do journalists not like PR people very much? Well, I think there's a number of reasons, some of which some of you may not like, some of which hopefully will resonate with you. I think one of the reasons, and I think it's understandable, is there's a certain sort of amount of jealousy. There are more PR jobs now, and they are better paid. And that's annoying. If I had to spend most of my life dealing with somebody who was earning more money than me and had better working conditions and for which there were more jobs, I would find that annoying. Whether it's a good thing there are now more PR people than journalists is a completely different debate, and I have some very major concerns about that. But the truth of the matter is, in the UK and the US, there are more PR people than journalists. And to use a very technical expression, it pisses journalists off, and it's not surprising. It is also true that journalists are more dependent on PR than they ever were before. I'm sure some of the journalists amongst you read Flat Earth News by Nick Davis and the research he did with Cardiff School of Journalism. And while some people say the figures aren't kind of absolutely right, without a doubt, journalists are having to produce an enormous amount more copy than they did 20 years ago. There are far more supplements than there were 20 years ago. I mean, the Sunday Times is enormous now. Think how small it used to be. Well, most of you won't remember, but a few of us in the audience will remember. The increase in the number of journalists has been minuscule, but they've now got to do online, all the supplements, they've got to do all the podcasts. So journalists are now tied to their desks. They can't go out and do much investigative reporting. A lot of what journalists end up doing is basically taking press releases and weighing them up, sometimes bashing them together to create a bit of controversy, or taking here are two different points of view and you make a story out of that. Very frustrating and annoying for journalists, because it's not why most journalists went into the business. And by the way, it's not just in the UK this is happening. I mean, Nick Davis's research is reiterated in the States. The Columbian Journalism Review, a study there found over half of stories in the Wall Street Journal, the sainted Wall Street Journal, were based solely on press releases. And so it goes on. So journalists become more dependent upon PR. Interestingly, actually, there's some evidence that actually, though, stories have become more negative. So more PR is being used, but the tone is more negative, which actually echoes with some of my experience, because if you haven't got a good investigative report has balance. If you haven't actually got time to go out and investigate it, it's much easier to create controversy and conflict. So you take two opposing releases and say, look, they said this and they said this, and now we've got a story. So it goes on. And of course, and I think this is a very serious point, journalists have got a completely different agenda from PR people, and quite rightly. Broadly, PR people want good news. Generally, journalists want bad news. The stuff that journalists would really be interested in is the stuff PR people are generally paid to try and keep out of the media. The stuff that PR people are paid to get into the media, journalists aren't generally that interested in. And in my view, that's a perfectly healthy kind of tension there. One of the analogies I use on this is, so if I can just say, could you describe to me a swan, please? I've arrived from Mars. White? You're lying. Some swans are black. Okay, I was being the journalist then. Yeah? So it's perfectly reasonable as a generality to say swans are white. But journalists, rightly, are looking for the variance, the false point in it. And there's a kind of clash of interest there. I don't think that's a bad thing. Journalists have driven me up the wall all my career. Good. As a citizen,
good. And by the way, as a PR person, good. Because if it was really easy to get one over journalists, you wouldn't earn much money as a PR person. But it's quite a serious point. People say, sometimes journalists say PR is bias. To me, that's extraordinary criticism. Yes, duh. That's like saying the sea is wet. And we are paid to represent a point of view. And a journalist is paid to try and weigh up these varying points of view and inform their readers, listeners, about the different positions. And I think increasingly, I have to say, I do think journalists are frustrated with their own role. People go into journalism with high hopes, a vision of breaking great stories, doing good, fighting corruption, whatever, and for most journalists, that doesn't come true, and it's frustrating. And PR people say who are earning more money represent something that niggles at journalists. So that's why I think journalists don't particularly love PR people. But, and this is a really, really important but, though most media now have a very high PR content, and that's a research figure, so it's in my book, the vast majority of PR is rejected. The vast majority of PR is rejected. It's something like 80% of press releases never get any coverage. And even if you get coverage, it's not always what you want. It's very difficult to get people to go, hey, he's great. Sometimes your attempts make them go, God, it's even worse than I thought. Part of the problems of PR. So PR is not as influential in the media as one might think. There's some other sort of general criticisms of PR. Sometimes PR people don't tell the truth. A lot of that criticism about PR people not telling the truth is a bit like what I just said about the abortion debate. It depends where you're sitting, what you think the truth is. One fact is true, a collection of facts is an opinion. Yeah? Is renewable energy better than nuclear energy? There's not a person in the room, actually, who knows, definitely. We can argue about it, we can debate it, and it's perfectly right and proper that there should be PR arguments for both those points of view. But they are PR, they are professional communicators trying to put over a point of view which will use facts and figures, but nobody has the precise answer, because there isn't one. Is organic food better than mass-produced food? With everything, with us eating all Romania's horses at the moment, people, we return to organic. But there is a view, and there's some very strong facts behind it, that actually organic is fantastically inefficient, because you have to use up enormous amounts more land. And these things aren't straightforward. But you can rest assured that people from the Soil Association, things like that, are saying, oh, big companies, bad, evil, and vice versa. So there's, these, what is the truth is quite slippery sometimes. And by the way, Andrew Marr, who I hope is getting better, his book My Trade, which some of you may have read, he admits it's impossible for people to always tell the complete truth. And I want to quickly give you some examples, because this is something that's been thrown at, it's thrown at PR people, been, all my career in PR, that PR people don't always tell the truth. Well, one of the facts is that journalists don't always have an absolute right to know the truth at any particular moment in time. Controversial thing to say, but if every company, charity, a government, and try and when you be critical about PR generically, try and imagine the PR for an organisation you really like and believe in. Yeah. If every time there was a disagreement on the board and you fessed up to it, nothing would ever happen. Organisations would collapse in on themselves. Yeah, because the media, understandably, the board is split. It's riven with, whatever. It's falling in on itself. Another way of looking at it is having reasonable conversations internally about what the direction might be. You cannot always be completely open about what's going on. Yeah? If your private conversations between you and your tutors were made public, anybody really keen on that idea? Because that's quite often what a journalist is expecting. Yeah? So these are difficult issues, and there's a kind of element of hypocrisy as well about it's not just journalists, it's actually about all of us, that, you know, we want people to be honest, on the one hand, you know, being honest, a very, very good thing. And then when people are honest, they're criticised for being naive. Alistair Darling, when he said, this is the biggest recession since the 1930s, was accused of being politically naive and honest. We admire cabinet collective responsibility when a politician toes the political line. That involves them lying sometimes. They say, yes, I do support this policy, when they don't, because they're abiding by the collective agreed line. So, you know, these things about kind of absolute truth are actually rather more complex. And I'll give you a couple more examples. This is one I've quoted before. We worked on, in my old business, we worked on the launch of a very major, at the time, very radical kind of bank. It spent a lot of money and investment launching it. And we had a strategy, if this story leaked out before launch day, and basically a journalist got wind of something and said, yeah, what's happening with this new bank? And we said, oh, it's not a new bank, it's a new administrative centre that we're building here in Leeds. Bit of a clue which bank I'm talking about. We weren't being completely honest. Yeah, and a month later we launched, we weren't being honest. A month later we launched the bank, the First Direct. Were we wrong not to have said to the journalist, yeah, you're absolutely right, you've got the story? Who would have benefited from that? Consumer wouldn't have benefited at all. Journalists might have got some personal benefit, as would competitors, completely undeserving, because they would have been able to have done spoilers and got things out. So you can't really expect companies to give away their secrets. And by the way, if you try and ring up, you know, the Times and say, what's going to be your front page tomorrow? Funny enough, they won't tell you, because it's commercially. And if you say, is it going to be, they may well lie to you as well, or they certainly refuse to tell you. So yeah, there's never an absolute on that. Max Clifford, Max Clifford uses the example of, he's represented an interesting array of people, including a number of footballers. Now, there's never been an out gay footballer who's still playing in the UK. The only one who ever came out was Justin Fashanu, who committed suicide. Clearly some kind of link there. Only ever out gay footballer. Clifford has represented at least one gay footballer. He's been called up by journalists. Mr. X is gay, isn't he? Clifford says no. So he's lied, because he knows he is. Does the footballer not have a right to privacy? If he's not made any claims, you know, to being a great married man or family life or anything like that, doesn't he have a right to privacy? It'd be jolly tough. I mean, you know, it'd be fantastic when the first footballer does come out, but it would be a jolly tough thing to do. And I don't have to say, I don't think that the media have an automatic right to that kind of information. And there's lots of examples like that. I mean, and ultimately, the judgment is if what PR people always consider to be little white lies or justified, you know, half-truths or whatever. Who did you hurt by telling that little white lie, half-truth? And that is ultimately the judgment. And all organisations do it. Not least charities, NGOs, and people that we admire. Anybody seen Lincoln, by the way, the movie? Only two of you. Cracking movie, yeah? Brilliant movie. And inspirational, wasn't he, Abraham Lincoln? Absolutely inspirational. The way he kind of got the Emancipation Bill through, got slavery abolished by lying, cheating, bribing, because we like the outcome, so we don't tend to criticise the process. Anyway, enough said. So, what are the criticisms of PR? That it distorts markets. I would argue that PR actually promotes a dynamic economy and aids consumption, just like advertising. But it's certainly true that PR does not aid equity necessarily, rather like the law. The law supposedly treats everybody equally, but hey, it's nice to have a lot of money if you're buying some law. It privileges the rich and powerful. PR privileges the rich and powerful. You've got money, you can buy more PR, which is, of course, in principle true, though the media, quite understandably, tend to favour David rather than Goliath, and they tend to give much more credence, in my view sometimes completely unwarranted credence, to NGO stories, charity stories, things like that, because they like David over Goliath. And they're kind of given benefit of the doubt in a way that businesses, for example, aren't. And by the way, if PR was quite so powerful and money bought you success, what happened to the banks then? Or BP? Or governments? You know, Blair. I mean, people with huge PR departments and power actually crash and burn. They have terrible images. So clearly PR actually, well, one, money doesn't buy you great PR, and two, PR probably isn't quite as important as some of its proponents make out, or indeed some of its critics. That's a key point. The critics of PR and its proponents both overrate its power. I can now say that because I'm not running a big business, but it's just true. PR isn't as powerful as a lot of people like to say. People say that PR encourages the love of celebrities and consumerism. It does a bit, without a doubt, but so do the media, and of course so do people. People put celebrities on in newspapers because people like it, and they buy it and they read it, and they find it more interesting than politics. I think it was the editor of the Daily Mirror said it would be suicide to put a political story on the front page, or the Sunday Mirror. It would be suicide to put a political story on the front page. Celebrity sells. PR is certainly involved in that world. Though why it's more guilty than media, but I'm slightly lost on me. And whilst, as I've said, it's true that media are reliant on PR, they use a lot of free PR, there's always a huge multiplicity of voices they can choose from. The vast majority of PR is rejected and not used. It's also worth noting that 80% of new products, which are almost invariably promoted with a lot of PR, they fail. So if PR was that powerful, how does that happen? There's two markets that have done fantastically well without PR or advertising. Any ideas? Really well. Big markets. Porn and illegal drugs. Yeah. So there's some things to do really well without PR and advertising. And as I've said, big companies, big politicians crash and burn despite having big PR resources. So, what about the defence of PR? Well, as I've said, firstly, PR is amoral, not immoral or moral, it's amoral. It depends what you do with it and your view on the objectives that are being pursued. As I say, if you like it, you call it a campaign. If you dislike it, you tend to call it propaganda, such is the way of the world. I would argue, and we've got some strong evidence for this, that PR is actually a really key part of the kind of modern information marketplace and of modern democracies. The two biggest PR markets in the world, the US and the UK, which have got the freest press, freest countries in the world, have got the biggest PR markets. PR and democracy tend to go together. Where is PR growing very, very quickly? In the developing countries where democracy is taking off. Because there's all these competing voices going on. There's competing companies, there's competing NGOs, there's competing political parties. It's a great babble of competing PR voices. So I take it as a good sign rather than a bad sign. Now, certainly PR can sometimes be trivial. There is inevitably a bit of truth in some of that fluffy fashion PR. There's also a bit of truth in some of that brutal political PR. Just like journalism, there's shallow stuff and nasty stuff, but the majority of the stuff in the middle actually is fairly uncontroversial. So my final statement really is asking if PR is good for us is a bit like asking if food is good for us. We undoubtedly need PR. Too much may be bad for you, and there's an interesting, maybe that's a debate for the kind of questions after, but I would argue PR is a symptom of freedom, and those of you going into PR, you're one, you're going into a very interesting profession, and two, I wouldn't be ashamed of PR per se. You might end up being ashamed of who you do PR for, but I wouldn't be ashamed of PR per se. Journalists, I think it's perfectly right and proper that you are always a bit sceptical about what PR people say to you. As a citizen, that's what I want you to do. Yeah? So, is PR good for us? Funny enough, PR man says yes. You didn't expect that ending, did you? There you go. That's it. Sorry, it took a bit longer than I intended. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
Using your years of experience, if you were the PR one for the Catholic Church in light of the recent scandal, what would you do and why?
Wow. Go to confession. I mean, actually, that takes you right back to the point I was making earlier about PR doesn't actually control reputation. I mean, they've got to dig really, really deep. You can't just say, oh, that was then, this is now. They've got to show that they've got stuff in place that will ensure, to the degree that that's possible, that those kinds of scandals never happen again. And yeah, it's the old thing, it takes a long time to build a reputation. It doesn't take long to destroy it. It does take a long time to build it. It will take them a long time to rebuild it. I mean, the BBC will recover from its recent travails, but it hasn't done it any good at all. And actually, the BBC and the Catholic Church are classic examples of where PR people say, well, we can sort it out. No, you can't. It's got to be sorted out right at the top, right the way through the organisation. PR is part of sorting it out. It won't. There is no simple answer. None at all. No, they've got to really, really hope that the next Pope hasn't got a dodgy track record. Yeah.
Obviously, like in the run to the Iraq War, the Arabs spin played a huge
Yeah.
and resulted in the deaths of like thousands of people. And I'm just wondering your thoughts.
Well, of course, I mean, with respect, and I'm not going to reveal my views on this. You've just made a PR propaganda type statement. So the PR in the run-up to the Iraq War led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. Or did the war lead to?
But it's the PR and spin is what made the country sort of. I mean, a lot of the country didn't want to go to war, but because of the weapons of mass destruction that never existed, that's why we went to war. And hundreds of thousands of people died because of that. So there's, I mean,
Yep. I actually do believe that generally they thought that there were weapons of mass destruction, and because once you go off down a particular route, people tend to look for the things that reinforce their points of view. So they went off down that route looking for that. Regardless of weapons of mass destruction, there is a case to be made for what went on in Iraq. And David Aronovich wrote a very interesting piece last week, I think, in the Times. I mean, David Aronovich is not some mad right-wing nutter, saying actually that it's still justified for the following reasons. There are points of view. Now, the fact that you think the war was wrong, therefore makes you think the PR was wrong, and okay, there was clearly an error in saying that there were weapons of mass destruction when there weren't. But broadly, the PR people were sort of doing their job. They went and got the information. I mean, they were being told by the intelligence services that there were. Now, did they then overspin it? These things are very difficult. There are always half-truths told in the run-ups to war, including wars that we've all supported. Or would have supported had you been young enough. It's difficult. Those are difficult calls. I mean, there's the whole thing about the propaganda to get the Americans into the First and the Second World War. Enormous amounts of PR, oblique propaganda used to draw them in. Well, my personal view is it's a good thing the Nazis were defeated, and if a few fibs were told along the way, or there's a bit of selective use of the facts, that's not necessarily the end of the world. Now, some people might say, yeah, but you corrupt society by doing it. You may. I mean, that's an argument as well. But it's a fair point you make. But if you've been on the other side, you might take a different view. Yeah. I say, think of it for an organisation that you really support or an activity that you believe in, and then people start to tend to say, oh, well, the means, the end justifies the means. which in any way to say that PR people should go around lying, because just on a practical basis, it's a pretty rubbish strategy because you get found out. Yeah? Yeah.
If 80% roughly of PR fails, how do you sell your services?
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a number of things about PR that, so does it work? How can you prove it works? It's actually very difficult to prove that it works. There are enough examples of when it's clearly worked that people would like some of it. Getting press coverage, by the way, and journalists, this is, worth you guys thinking about as well. You can have tons of press coverage, nothing changes. There's no influence on behaviour. You can have brilliant film reviews, films fail. You can have politicians backed by the majority of the media, they still don't get in. The media is not quite as influential as it likes to think. So it's hard to prove that PR always works, but when it does work very powerfully and people want a bit of it. There's also the fear of negative PR, and actually tends to be the higher up you go in the PR hierarchy, the more you're involved in dealing with negative PR, what would be perceived as negative PR. There's also elephant dust. And you heard the story of there's a man on a train in India, and he sees this guy, and he's just going like this, throwing powder out the window, and he said, well, what are you doing? What's that? He said, well, it's elephant dust. He said, but there aren't any elephants. He said, well, you see, it works. And there's a bit of that, that's true of some advertising as well. We'd better do PR because everybody else is doing PR. We better do advertising because everybody else is doing advertising. But it is hard to prove outright. But it happens often enough. I mean, my old business, we did Think Road Safety. We did the PR for that. Deaths on British roads have gone down. Fantastically successful PR campaign. Oh, the advertising agency also think that they made a contribution. Fair enough. So a fantastically successful communication campaign. Road deaths have gone down. The truth of the matter is, nobody can prove to you that the communication actually affected that. Airbags in cars saved, which have become absolutely commonplace, saved loads of lives. Traffic calming has saved loads of lives. Perversely, Afghanistan has probably saved lives because we're better at stitching people back together again. All those kinds of things have reduced road deaths. Did the communication make a difference? Almost definitely, but I can't prove it. This government, the new coalition government, did stop advertising and PRing some of the flu jabs and things like that, and they have actually been able to measure there's been a falling off of people taking the jabs and an increase in flu. So that's a clear impact of the comms. But proving that comms influence behaviour is difficult, and actually influencing behaviour in a big way with comms on its own is difficult. And most of the campaigns that people say, oh, well, look what comms did. Cigarettes. Hey, I think we'll find the law and the cost of cigarettes had a huge impact in the decline in smoking. And it took an awful long time as well, despite a lot of comms against cigarette smoking. Yeah.
What do you think about the idea that maybe what journalists don't like is bad PR?
Yeah.
I mean, in my experience, the issue is the companies that insist on getting between the client and the journalist, every little factual query has to go via the press office or via the PR firm. To what extent do you think it's bad PR rather than PR that journalists are against?
Oh, I'm sure it's a lot of it's bad PR. And if I was a journalist and I was constantly rung up by people saying, have you got my press release? Which I always say, I say to PR people, that's the equivalent of somebody ringing you up and saying, did you get my junk mail? I mean, it's just appalling, and I do understand completely. But some clients actually want their PR people to be between them and the press because some of the press behaviour has been so aggressive, and in some instances so unprincipled, that clients are terrified of the media. And so they place their PR people between themselves and the journalists. And journalism is not without blame in this, at all. So there's a certain degree to which journalists have got a PR they deserve, a bit. But yeah, there's lots of bad PR. I have to say lots of bad journalists. The world is not perfect. But yeah, understandably journalists don't like getting useless calls, useless press releases, and being obstructed. And if I was a journalist and you've got Trevor Morris ringing you in the morning saying, I've got this really positive story, you know, got this amazing research and we found that your attitudes are changing, I hope you can use it. Sell, sell, sell. In the afternoon, the same journalist rings me up and says, we've just heard that there's a division between your marketing director and your finance director about, I go, no, it's not true. It's not surprising that journalists get annoyed. But that's the role of the PR person, is to handle both those situations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think you'd be more facilitators on occasion rather than trying to dictate it?
Yeah, I mean, they are quite often actually, not much more than facilitators. Where, I mean, the least well-paid areas of PR generally are the least controversial, and where the PR people are facilitators, but also where, frankly, the journalism is also the mars. And I'm sorry if any of you are just against fashion journalism. Fashion PR is very badly paid. It's fashion journalism, fashion PR is badly paid because, relatively speaking, well, one, most people want to get into it, but two, it's incredibly easy. There's lots and lots of media out there, we love it, and you ring up a fashion title, would you like to come to the spring launch of the Armani collection? You would, great. That's a much easier sell than, hello, would you like to do a piece on household insurance? You wouldn't, no. You get, the difficult stuff's better paid, and of course that tends to be more controversial stuff as well. Yeah.
Are you ever allowed to have your own personal opinion, or do they get suppressed after years?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you won't be surprised to hear I'm a very opinionated person. Yeah, of course people do.
I guess as a caveat to that, have you ever been in a situation where you've had to go totally against your personal opinion to benefit the client?
No, and I've never made a member of staff do something against their will. So if somebody didn't want to do it, then they're not going to do it well if it's completely against their principles, against their moral principles. You might, what I'm about to say, you might say, well, because he hasn't got many moral principles. I turned down, I never did cigarettes, even though I was a very heavy smoker. Not necessarily, to be honest, particularly moral even. It was, I just didn't want the bore of having to justify it at dinner parties. And also, it would restrict our access to government accounts as well. So but I turned down individuals who I didn't trust and didn't think were honest. And that, I've got to tell you, they pop up everywhere. You know, I promise you, business doesn't have a unique grasp on dishonest people. There are, politics, NGOs. I mean, some of the most brutal stuff I've seen is from charities. Charities need money, they need supporters. It's quite frightening at times, and because they've got that sense of sort of self-righteousness, in a sense, moral right on their side, their moral stance is sometimes very iffy. But no, by and large, I haven't done it for anything, I guess, that's so controversial that I'm trying to think what would. I've worked for a company, worked for Vickers, who used to make tanks, so that's since done armaments. But my view was, we must then like tanks. If somebody's going to make tanks, I'd rather it was a properly regulated British company than, some dodgy firm. And we weren't actually going, hey, go out and buy tanks, they're great for you. We're just trying to position Vickers and what they do.
Oh, are there any more questions? We've got a couple more. Can we take just a couple more then, and then we'll need to wrap it up because Trevor's got to have a bit of lunch and get a train back down to London.
Do you have any advice when you kind of people wanting to go into PR?
You're trying to get into it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to intern a few places and things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anybody who wants to go into PR, you've got to read a lot, and not just Twitter, not just social media. You should be reading everything from The Sun through to the Financial Times. I don't necessarily mean from cover to cover every day, and you should be listening to XFM and Radio 4. Really good PR people consume a lot of media. Really good PR people have the ability to put themselves in other people's shoes. I mean, actually, my view is one of the reasons there are, it's not the only reason, one of the reasons so many women in PR is actually that women are, sweeping generalisation, but generally better at empathy than men. They can better able to imagine, well, how would that person feel, what would be persuasive to them, whilst men tend to be a bit more didactic and you should do this. So try and look at different audiences, try and imagine what would be persuasive to them, consume their media. And if you apply for jobs, even if it's an internship, don't say, hello, I'm doing I'm interested in communications and PR. Think about them. Good communicators talk about the people they're talking to. So say what you could do for them in the first paragraph. Because the covering letters, by the way, is really important. Yeah, people spend too much time sometimes on the CV. If you don't get past the covering letter, your CV is irrelevant, really. And particularly right now, to be honest, people are being bombarded with stuff. Yeah.
You say that a lot of PR doesn't have that much power over something that they particularly don't want to change.
That's an interesting point. I mean, there's a whole debate which we don't have really time to go into. I mean, if the media becomes too weakened, and I think there's a real danger, particularly post-Leveson, that actually the media gets weaker still. A weaker product will be less consumed, advertising will continue to flee it. So the kind of media that we've learned to appreciate for some of its aggression, independence, things like that, will disappear. Will be very bad for society and for me as a citizen, you as a citizen, it will also be bad for PR, because they take some skill in manipulating, managing, working with the media to present your argument. If basically the media just printing out press releases, that's pretty low skill. I mean, some of you, I no doubt get at home the local authority newspaper, newsletter, which you might kind of skip through, but you know what it is. It's PR, it's propaganda for the local authority. It's never going to expose corruption of the finance director of the local authority or whatever, is it? Or kind of really tear it apart for its failure to collect the bins. And that kind of stuff is lower paid, less skilled, because it's easier. Though, like I say, when it comes down to this, what happens to the media ultimately is, in my view, very, very important. Personally, I'm not at all happy with Leveson. But some people in PR think it won't make much difference. I actually think it will do that, but we'll see.